All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. And have we got a great show for you today? Because we're going to talk directly to cost of living and the pressures that people are facing right now. And how are we going to do that, Ben? We are going to talk real life case studies and the thousands of dollars that people are saving right now. But what else?
Bryce, we're going to unpack the bank story, the interest rate story, the fixed rate expiry story. We're going to talk all things like that through the lens of the investment savvy broker. But Bryce, what is an investment savvy broker? We're going to unpack that as well.
It's a great question you asked, Ben. Let's rip into the show.
Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance, and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. Welcome back to you too, mate. How are you?
Good, buddy. Yourself?
I'm pretty good.
That's good.
You did a PICA webinar this week. How'd that go?
I did. Well, yeah, I think the feedback was pretty good. I mean, it's obviously markets within markets with a big takeaway there, Bryce, in terms of lots of different moving parts.
That's a new
I know it's the different, but look, it was well received. We had a good attendance, and obviously it's now on demand. So people will be able to check it out, but only if you're a PICA member, Bryce. Only if you're a PICA member.
Well, very good. So go and do that, folks. It was a good session. Go and check it out. Hey, I think today's conversation, is a really timely, practical conversation that we can have, Ben, because we're gonna unpack a little bit around what an investment savvy mortgage broker actually does. Because we've had a few people, Ben, you and I were chatting about this before we hit the record button today, around people saying, okay, we get it now. You guys have been talking for a number of years that you need an investment savvy mortgage broker, but what is one and what do they do? So we're actually going to show that today by actually giving examples of the work that they do to benefit their clients. So we've got a stack of examples that we're going to run through. So I'm looking forward to that. But before we get there, Ben, we'll kick it off with mindset minutes. Morgan Housel said this: people gauge their well-being relative to those around them, and luxuries become necessities in a remarkably short period of time when the people around them become better off, Ben. So another way of talking about the Joneses, but people gauge their well-being relative to those around them. So I was thinking about this, and it's particularly dangerous in times like this. We've had some conversations with our planning team, Ben, where all of a sudden people, when interest rates were low, they had Teslas all of a sudden. And lots of toys, and then all of a sudden, those things that were considered luxuries are now considering necessities, which causes a fair bit of financial anxiety for many. And I must admit, Ben, for my own example, I've been thinking about this. Obviously, live here in Torquay, Ben, and saunas, like
they're
a bit of a luxury, right?
Yeah, right.
But heaps of people around here, Ben, they got their own sauna out the back. One of my mates has got one out the back. One of our other mate across the road one's got one out the. And all of a sudden,
that's because of the weather down there, isn't it? So they can actually stay warm.
I love how you say that as if it's like 15 degrees different to where you live. But all of a sudden, that started to feel like a bit of a necessity, Ben, rather than a luxury. But I think the core point here of all of the Joneses stuff and all of this comment here is basically that financial problems are way more of a consequence on most of the time are way more of a consequence on the expense side than they are on the income side, because we'd all love a bit more, but usually it's the expense side that gets us.
Well, here's what happens, right? I mean, ultimately, if we play out the storyboard, we were restricted for movement for 2 years, but we pretty much earned all the same salaries that we've got. So we couldn't spend it on the things that we wanted to spend it on. And then now we do have those freedoms. There's no doubt that when we're catching up the barbecues and the picnics and the sporting events, that someone's telling me about we just did a quick trip to Fiji, or we're off to Bali, or we bought a sauna, or we've upgraded the car, because record low interest rates meant that there was a huge amount of disposable income also building up in those accounts. So it's absolutely logical that if you're sitting at home and seeing your bank balance improving, the kids are saying, oh, why can't we have this PS5? And, or why can't, our friends have got this, our friends have got that. So it's very common to feel that pull towards increasing your spending towards those discretionary and lifestyle items. And it's very easy mentally to tell yourself a narrative and a story. Yeah, actually, yeah. You know what? I tell you what, that sauna, well, that'll do the job. Like I need to come home from work. I need to shed. I need to, and then I'll jump in the pool. Whatever it is, like everyone can tell themselves a narrative. They could have their story and then, their state of mind and act in that way. And when cash flow's cool, Bryce, it's easy to sort of justify it as well, right?
But at 0.1% cash rate, Ben, there's lots of things can be necessities when they used to be luxuries, but when the cash rate moves up to the current state of where it is now.
Well, new car sales, Bryce, off the charts, like absolutely off the charts. And now, you have to wait 6 to 12 months to get your car. All those cars are now actually being delivered.
Yeah.
And I reckon people are going,
go,
$15,000, $20,000 extra in mortgage repayments hitting the household budget. All of a sudden now that may not necessarily be essential. So yeah, definitely true. It's very, very common.
So there you go, folks. People gauge their well-being relative to those around them, and luxuries become necessities in a remarkably short period of time when the people around you become better off. Thank you, Morgan Housel, for that quote. Hopefully that's given you something to think about, Ben. But we obviously want to lean in on that. We know that people are under pressure. We know for a lot of people, it's a blunt instrument around interest rates, but it is impacting a bunch of people disproportionately. But of the disproportionate who are affected, it is definitely affecting them. So we thought we'd go through today and just talk to some examples that we think will hopefully stimulate hopefully some conversations where people can think, well, maybe if I'm suffering a bit of inertia, which we'll talk about shortly, that they might do something. But we set out, so a couple of things. We talk about investment savvy mortgage brokers because our business is one, folks. We started as a mortgage broking business. Empower Wealth was a mortgage broking business first, and then it evolved to the business that it is now, right? So our roots are in mortgage broking. Our roots are in helping people set up finance in a way that allows them to play the game of chess that we've talked about on many occasions, Ben, where we don't want you to set up for today. We want you to set up so that there's a runway for you to get additional lending going forward so that you can fulfill what we've been talking about on the podcast for 431 episodes. But so as part of that, we set ourselves a program to save interest last financial year. We set ourselves a target. This is before the aggressive rate rises. So thinking financial year ending 30 June last year for $1.5 million. So what we wanted to do is we said to our team, we said to our clients, we actually want to set ourselves a target of how can, and because we track it, how can we save $1.5 million in interest on behalf of our clients? And we're excited to get to that end of that financial year, Ben. And if the target was $1.5 million, this was the result: $2,441,187.33. Almost $1 million, so $941,187.33 over our target. So that was money back into people's pockets. Largely, if they were listening to our teachings, Ben, largely put back into their offset account, which would be helping to reduce their most expensive debt, whatever that is, typically the principal place of residence. So as a result of that, we then set ourselves a stretch target of $3 million for this financial year, Ben, that ends in 30 June. So at the time of recording is about, about 3 and a bit months, almost 4 months away from getting there. So, and we're on track to do that. So today we want to talk to you about a couple of things we're doing, Ben, to help people save that interest.
I think it's really important that when you are thinking about your strategy, so plan to become what you plan to become, and as part of our 5-step process, we're always been focusing in on strategy and tactics. So when you're talking about planning and implementation, we're talking about strategy and tactics. Now, what have we been talking about at the start of this year? For those 30% of the population who can act, they're going to make a very, very good return on their investment over the course of the next 3 to 5 years, because they're in a position, a very, very fortunate position, to be able to add to their portfolio and do very, very well. But there is 70% of that market population, including our client base, that we're now sort of saying it's unlikely that you're going to be able to act. And we gave you this warning 18 months ago, and we said interest rates and borrowing power and all that will start to go, will we reduce, interest rates will go up. So what do we do from a tactical point of view to support those borrowers? And so we've always talked about interest rates as not being critical when you're looking at borrowing power and in your accumulation phase. Well, for the next year or two, for some of those households, they may not be in a position to add to that portfolio. So if that is the case, then we need to then tactically think about what's important. So that might mean, and this is what we're talking about here today, is moving lenders or getting the sharpest interest rate you possibly can to make sure that you're making every dollar work as hard as possible for you. So that's the sort of the emphasis here on, reviewing that sort of story and starting to think about those tactics. So 30%, keep charging forward. You're going to make a small fortune in the next few years in terms of as you acquire properties when everyone else is not. And then the other 70%, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do some work on helping you think about your money. And one of the biggest money flows out of the household is your interest as part of the debts that you hold. So I think that's the segue for today's show. And then coming back to your point earlier, Bryce, about demonstrating what investment savvy brokers do, I think we reached out to our brokers and said, give us some story. Well, we got a heap of them. So we've handpicked about 6 or so because we're very fortunate. We've got thousands and thousands of clients, and we've got a multi-award-winning brokerage business. But this is going to showcase exactly the type of work that gets done day in and day out, and things for you to, as our community, to think about in terms of your own mortgage story and what you're doing for yourself to help yourself out.
Folks, every dollar has got a job to do in your household. So that's what we want to do, is show you how you can get those dollars doing the best work for you. Banks prey on your inertia, folks. So that's the number one thing that we want to remind you. Now, if you're listening to this, there'll be some details in the show description. Episode 406, we did one on how to beat the banks, right? So if you need to brush up on some of that stuff after this one, go and have a listen to that. There's also some YouTubes that you can go to, which we'll put in the show description around, that Ben's broken down how to beat the banks, fixed rate expiries, all that sort of stuff on our more YouTube channel. So we'll put those details there. But you are paying a loyalty tax because the banks are preying on you doing nothing, right? So and it's a fact that new people who are coming to the bank are getting better deals than the existing ones because of that inertia. So today we want to actually show you some stories where people didn't sit on that inertia, which was there's several thousands of dollars in some of these cases, Ben. But it's worth talking about mortgage prison too. We've talked about it a couple of times over the last week, but let's sort of define it a bit.
Yeah. So what's happening now is, based on the servicing minimum requirements that APRA have put into the market, and I've been rabbiting on a little bit about this, but I just want to unpack it again to remind those new to the pod in terms of how it all works. But effectively, when the cash rate was down at 0.1 of 1%, APRA introduced a servicing buffer of 3%. So effectively, they removed the floor rate and said, any sort of lending you need to add, so your servicing rate, you need to add 3% on top of that in terms of the rate that the customer is going to get their funds for, and then you need to add 3% on top of that. So where we're at now is effectively the cash rate has gone from 0.1 to 3.35, and so we're now beyond that buffer rate. And so what's actually happening is the banks are not pushing back on APRA very much at all here, because they don't want the customer to be able to have the ability to move to another lender. So we've got this mortgage prison unfolding where effectively, due to APRA's basically strong-handed approach, their steel manning approach on how they're looking after the so-called, sort of financial stability of the markets, they're actually playing into the bank's hands and doing incredible damage to consumers, because they're not allowing those consumers to refinance. But what they are allowing them to do is to restructure internally, as opposed to moving to a third-party lender. And we just find that incredibly unfair when there's 800,000 fixed rate loans that are coming out of expiry. So by way of example, you're with a big four, you've got a current fixed rate loan of say, 2.19, and you've got your 3% on top of that, which makes it 5.19. So you can assess at that level. But when you're going to a new lender and they've got their asking mortgage rates of 5% or 5.5% now, and you've got 3% on top of that. So they have to assess at 8.5%, which means you don't meet their servicing criteria. So you can't move to that better deal. But the banks who currently hold you as an investor client or an owner-occupied client with a fixed rate loan, guess what? You're stuck there. So we're going to also give a few clues away in terms of if you are stuck there, how to still beat that bank. Because at the end of the day, the reason why we set up a mortgage broking business when I first founded the business was that the banks are a vehicle, right? In terms of when you're thinking about wealth creation and using property as that particular story, it's a game of bricks and mortar. It's a game of finance just as much as it's a game of bricks and mortar. And so they are part of the vehicle. They're selling the widgets. They're not necessarily, I need to, basically, I don't want the mortgage, but I'll take it because I need the debt because I want to obviously grow my wealth based on a higher asset value. So that's where I'm going with this particular story. So I wish that APRA will do something, and I suspect their hands are going to be forced because we're starting to see a bit of momentum in the mainstream media about, putting pressure on APRA because, quite frankly, they are restricting the Australian consumer, and by doing that, they are inadvertently also putting stress on the financial system. So if they were to reduce that buffer rate or introduce a floor rate at maybe 6.5%, where it should be, 6.5% to 7%, then we'll start to see more mortgage activity and consumers getting a better deal. And right now they're getting ripped off by their banks.
So what we want to reprogram is that the bank is they're just a cog, right? So we don't want you to fall in love with the bank because, as Ben said, they're providing the widget. So the theme across this entire podcast that we want to ram home today is just ask the question. Start the conversation, ask the question to see if there's anything that you can do to even if you're not under pressure, Ben, under overt pressure, it's still better to get you, if every dollar has got a job to do within your balance sheet, within your profit and loss, within your own household, we'll get it working harder in your favor. Yeah. So, all right, let's talk to a couple of examples, Ben. So the first one here is from some clients. We're not going to talk about names or banks here, right? We're just going to talk about strategies and scenarios. So the first one had debt spread across two lenders. One was a major bank and one was a non-bank lender, all investment debt. So this particular client wanted a mortgage review because the capacity was tight to support a refinance. So they selected. So what happened is our team selected a lender with a simple year-to-date annualization policy to allow for overtime and etc. To be used in the assessment with the ease for meeting the capacity for this refinance. So the rates went from 6.26% for owner-occ and 6.49 for investment property to 5.02 and 5.43 respectively. So here's the bit that everyone's interested in, Ben. The interest saving was $3,100 plus $10,207. So in total, there was $13,307 annually plus $2,000 refinance rebate as an added incentive. So the time frame from start to finish was 7 weeks. That comes from insider knowledge, Ben.
Yeah, look, it does, Bryce. I mean, this is Matt, one of our brokers here, and he's done a great job in terms of assessing the deal, looking at the refinancing being a little tight. So he has to find the lender. And this is where subject matter knowledge in terms of the lending assessments. So you want to be a subject matter expert in terms of looking at all of the main lenders that you're working with. So Matt was able to break this cog through or break through this deal by doing what's called a year-to-date annualized policy assessment. So looking at the year-to-date, extrapolating that out meant that he was able to get past the servicing calculator there, get a positive result on that, get that formally approved, move lenders and save that $13,000 plus the cherry on top, which is the 2,000 refinance rebate for that particular lender. Now, of course, refinancing doesn't happen overnight. There is a process that you have to go through in terms of discharging yourself from your existing lender, moving across to that new lender, and usually that discharging process can take some time. The lender that you're leaving can potentially be a little bit slow in that particular process, but it's a great story about Matt Kirk, our broker, knowing his policies, knowing his numbers, and getting the job done really simply for that particular client. And that 13,000, and I should say here, Bryce, that's just the interest savings. So that's the money on the table, right? So that's not leaving. And then if that money is now every month is going to be incrementally increasing in the offset account. So there's even further interest savings outside of just that outbound cost of money or that outbound interest saved that we're talking about here. So coming back to your point before about the millions of dollars that we've saved our clients, that's just in the interest saved column.
Yeah.
The future
not the compounding
interest
column.
saved. Yeah, exactly. The future interest saved and the lifestyle saving over the loan is in the tens of millions of dollars as that compounds over the next sort of 5 to 10 to 20 years.
And it demonstrates the investment savvy mortgage broker is not just about tactics. It's not just about getting a loan. It's actually the strategy that's above it, looking over a long enough time horizon and then getting caught up in the tactics too. So that lands. So clearly that's a good one there. Now, one of the things that happens in the broking industry too, Ben, is people get concerned around churning, which means a mortgage broker is actually just moving bank for the sake of them actually getting paid by the bank for doing that. So here's an example of what someone with integrity who's an investment savvy mortgage broker can do, and they don't get paid an absolute cent for this, right? It's just a good outcome for the client, and this is actually a real live example. So we had another scenario, a different client, where that client came very stressed after speaking with their existing bank. So they had, just for the detail, they had a loan of 2.2 million, fixed rate loan of 2.79 expiring in February. And the existing lender told her that the variable rate will go from that wonderful 2.79 Ben to 7.06, which is a 4.27 jump. That is significant, and unfortunately didn't have the capacity at that level, right? So what happened is reached out to us and renegotiated the revert rate. So instead of being that 7.06, it ended up being 5.34, which is, and here we go in terms of dollars and cents, $37,840 in interest savings annually just for having that conversation, just by seeing if there's a better opportunity. And the time frame from start to finish was approximately 2 days. And the amount received by this particular investment savvy mortgage broker for their effort, Ben, was zero in that transaction, but the ongoing goodwill and the lifetime value of the relationship that we have with that particular client. Well, how can you put a price on that? But even if the borrowing capacity is not supported for these circumstances, you don't have to accept the lender's first offer because getting them to sharpen their pencil. Revert back to the original conversation. They treat new customers better than the existing ones. So you've got to jockey for position, have someone with experience that can allow you to get that so they can get some of these better rates.
Right, so I want to build on that because back in the day when these historically low fixed rates were coming out and effectively 70% of the marketplace took advantage of them. So that's good advice. They did the right thing by either having a portion of their loan fixed or completely fixing quite a lot of it because that was super cheap money. But as part of that, no one really then negotiated hard on the discount rate that it reverts back to after that fixed period finishes. So if you got a 3-year fixed rate, usually you then get a discount off the variable rate. Now, a lot of those discounts were very plain, boring, and not significantly priced as where they should be. Now, the world has changed. We saw CBA's record half-year result, over $5 billion in profit, right? But Matt Common's comments were it's an extremely aggressive marketplace out there at the moment. So if you're thinking that, well, I can't move from one lender to another, and you're rolling out of your fixed rate into a variable rate, and you see your contract and you've got a 1% or 1.5% discount off that I promise you that whatever that revert rate looks like, there would be better deals out in the marketplace today. So what Matt has just done here is that to the customer's point, the customer's rung the call center's brought that client's file up, and there's a quoted range in terms of, yes, no, that's right, your interest rate will be 706, because remember that reversion discount rate wouldn't have been sharp at all because everyone was just focused on the fixed rate loan. So the contracts people signed, they didn't worry about tomorrow, they just worried about that fixed rate term. Matt's gone, well, and to our client's credit, she's just asked the question, to your point, right? She's just asked the question and Matt's gone, that doesn't sound right. That's not a competitive rate. You're coming out of that fixed rate. So no, you're right. We're tapped out based on APRA. We can't take you to any other competitive lender. So let's just go back to the same lender on my own time. On time, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get no reward for it in terms of I'm not going to get paid. I'm going to save you almost $38,000 in annualized interest saved because I know that you're being ripped. That is too high an interest rate to be paying. And so 2 days work in terms of connecting to that bank as being an agent of that bank, because brokers are agents of all of the banks that we work with, are able to ask the question. And the best part about it is when you're informed, when you do this job day in, day out, you absolutely know when you're getting the rug pulled over your eyes. So it wasn't a hard conversation. It's like, sorry, I just put 3 other different clients to you, last week and the week before. I know the pricing discount that I got for the new variable loan, and you're now saying for this particular client that sorry, they've got to be on a 7. No, and so they've got nowhere to hide, right? Ultimately, the pricing it's so they have to agree. They realise that their net interest margin is going to get whacked from the banking's point of view, and they have to bring it down to a 534. That's ultimately in the best interest of the client. Matt's done a great job, and hopefully that client will be a client for life for Matt because effectively he's done an awesome job in doing the right thing. Again, without basically paying $1. And I relate this to how great doctors are. You get a great relationship with your local GP, and you've got a quick phone call because you're worried about something, and he says, no, I think you're right, stand down, it's all good. You don't get a bill for that 5-minute, 10-minute phone call. Now, it took Matt 2 days, needed to do a bit of paperwork, put it all through. But what an amazing, this is meaningful and impactful work. And coming back to what an investment savvy broker should be doing, meaningful and impactful work, building relationships. That is part of what your, investment savvy broker should be doing for you. They understand you're on a journey. And they understand you're trying to create a better tomorrow of, financial peace on this journey. And they want to play a role in that because there's no greater joy, Bryce, in terms of when I've been doing this particular work myself, when you make that phone call, hey, this is what I got. This is how good it is. You just feel, you get a warm glow that you've made a massive impact in that person's life.
Just shows it's an insider's game too, Ben, because what you just talked about then is something that you actually have through being in the trenches and knowing the comparisons across what all the products are across all the institutions. It's very difficult for people to stay abreast of that unless they're so I concur with everything you're saying there. So there's a couple of examples around repricing and refinancing, or just asking the right question. But back to our theme of starting a conversation or just seeing if it's an option for you. There's a third one here, another scenario where we had a property for investment only lending. So the current client was rent vesting, so they're staying at home. Early 30s, just got married, were living overseas, right? So so through that review of the pricing, settled in June and got $13,743 per year in interest, just by getting a further discount on their rate. So it kind of shows that if you're not actively reviewing your lending, you may be leaving money on the table. And again, just to highlight that money, $13,743, as to your point before, Ben, doesn't take into account the compounding story. So these are real life examples, Ben, of people actually getting money back that they can put hopefully into their offset accounts.
Yeah, it's just a great news story. This one's Alana. She's done a great job here and just basically looking at the change in circumstances, what's happened for that particular household. They were rent vesting, and she said, "Well, okay, looking at the current situation, what are the owner-occupied versus the investment property loan splits worth? There's a deal here to be had in terms of getting a sharper price, putting money back in your pocket." So she's just done the work, and again, coming back to what investment savvy brokers should be doing, the critical thinking, right? Like ultimately, the amount of knowledge that you build up as you get an experienced broker, and then you get an experienced brokerage with, lots of brokers, and everyone's iron sharpening iron, and everyone's getting sharper with their knowledge, and they're sharing the scenarios on a weekly basis. You just bring in a depth of knowledge that the sum of the parts are so powerful that you can get those types of results. So it's that critical thinking and that group of problem-solving people around you that allows you to get to the solution quicker, and gives you a choice in terms of how you can make the most of basically not leaving money on the table.
All right, so we've got another one here. So we're on a roll. So another client, this is chatting with Thomas. So another client was able to get a refinance on their existing. So there was a couple of things going on. Interest saved on the refinance was $9,200, which is significant on its own, but also able to get $4,000 cash back from a Big Four lender. And here's the deal. To move the lending actually cost this particular client $1,200. But if you net those two off, you've got $13,200 in front, $1,200 to move. So $12,000 in year one that they saved. And then I guess the extra mail on this was then, okay, once we got to settlement, was able to go in and get further price discount and a final push around retention. So getting an extra 0.05% off their owner occupier loan and 0.2% off investment loans, saving a further $1,300. So the original 13.2 less the 1.2 was 12,000, and then getting the extra pricing after settlement added another 1,300. So total benefit of $13,300. So importantly here, this particular client in this example, a couple of things. LVR of 28% on their own principal place of residence and 53% on the investment property. So the bank's obviously done a bit of a risk assessment here, seeing them as a gold brick. And then the actual value of the owner occupier loan was $221,000, and the value of the investment loans was $590,000. So hopefully anyone's listening to that going, oh, I thought, the previous example we talked was $2.2 million loan. Sure, there's a fair bit, but there's some significant savings to be had here, Ben, on modest and relatable loan sizes that don't have to be in the seven figures to get access to some of these things. So again, in our theme of making sure you ask the question, you don't want to die wondering if this stuff's available for you.
No, I mean, again, it's a super competitive marketplace out there, Bryce. I mean, every day I get a list of all the different lenders, and there's, I've got 22 lenders currently available to us of our 40 plus on our panel that are offering cashbacks. And so here's an example of a $4,000 cashback on top of that story as well. Thomas also highlights, it's really important that it does cost to move from lender to lender. So if your investment savvy broker should break down your transfer costs. So what is the cost to discharge the mortgage? What is the cost to register the new mortgage? Because you want to basically see the true cost in terms of how it's all coming together. But it also, highlights a couple of really important things for me. In terms of loan size isn't super critical, but if you also have, this is where the inertia bit kicks in, Bryce, is that people are like, oh, yeah, I'm covering my mortgage because I only have a 40% total loan to value ratio or whatever. So it's like, well, I'm sort of covering it, right? My debts aren't as big as what they used to be. But it's, again, another example of leaving money on the table. And if you have a really healthy loan to value ratio, you're, to Bryce's point, you're a gold brick to that lender, which means that, ultimately that is security for future lending that they do in terms of accessing that funds at a cheaper rate, means that they increase their net interest margin in terms of what they lend that money out to you for. So you ultimately can get some of the benefit of that by having a really low LVR, which means you can get a sharper interest rate, which ultimately flows through to your bottom line as well. So there's some really good messaging in there. One final point on that, I was talking to Kevin, one of our other brokers this morning, and there is a lot of competition. People are, banks are buying business at the moment through these cashbacks and, all of these points and different frequent flyer, all these different offers that are out there. We know of one particular lender. So this is coming back to what does an investment savvy broker know? They are so attuned to their market because that's all they do. They don't do anything else. They're not doing property investment advice. They're not doing buyer's agency service. They're not doing tax advice. They're not doing super. The investment savvy broker is locked in a single purpose in terms of what they're doing. Well, anyway, we've discovered one particular lender who will remain nameless, but they are giving cash back on every security that you bring across. So by way of example, if you've got a security with a $500,000 loan on it, that's $3,000 for every one of those securities that you might bring across to that lender. Now, if you're one of these, clients who have got 5 or 6 properties and you've got a significant amount there, you're talking about potentially, well, let's say 3 properties, that's $9,000 in cash back. If you've got properties if you've got properties over $1 million or debt associated with that properties over $1 million, that's $4,000 instead of 3. So now which lender is that? Well, that's what the brokers know, right? That's their job. And if your broker doesn't know who that lender is and doesn't give you that option, this comes back to one of my other critical points around the problem solving and the solution provisions that they provide. Investment savvy brokers provide problem solving and solution provisions that are second to none, that really do understand the puzzle, the critical thinking that they need to do, and can potentially bring you around on that particular story. So that just gave me an opportunity to talk about what's happening in the market, that, banks are buying business. So you want to make sure that if you haven't refinanced or had your mortgage reviewed in the last 12 months, you'd be surprised in terms of the competitive nature and the pricing that's currently happening out in the market.
Ben, you talked to about when people got loan balances that are low, the often unheralded status symbol that everyone should be sort of beating their chest is the paid off mortgage, right? So the fact that if you've got a lower balance, the old amortization graph that you see, and it's like hardly anything's done in the early days, and then you smash it off at the end. You should be actually using that graph to your advantage if you're getting towards the pointy end of knocking it off, and then you can actually get access to some of this money, which will only further compound in your favor the trajectory of paying that off, because that is the unheralded status symbol, paying off your mortgage instead of the Tesla, and go back to my mindset minute, anything else that you're using to compare yourself with others. Paying the peace of mind that comes from having your own home paid off is just enormous. Hey, the next one comes from Luke, from is also one of our team here, Ben. And it's a scenario that some people will face. They've got a house, they want to upgrade, they want to go to another one. They found the one that they want first before they sell the one that they have, and they need some bridging finance in between. So this is a scenario where bridging finance was required. So if they wanted to keep both houses in for the time it took for the bridging to happen, their existing current bank would charge them 7.4% on a large portion of the bridging lending until they sold the home. So what happened is started the conversation, asked the question, and the review found out that if the refinance went to a Big Four lender, here's a couple of things. They offer them a $4,000 rebate, which we've been talking about, to refinance. But also, in comparison to that 7.4% bridging, they would offer 6.04%. And here's the interest saving, $8,638 for the 12-month period that they had 2 properties. $8,638, Ben. So there's a fair bit that they're in front.
Yeah, whack the 4,000 on top of that, and you're 12 grand in front in terms of the overall story. Now, this is another perfect example. Like we've talked about refinances, we've given you a couple of those examples. We've talked about fixed rate expiries. Interest only expires is another critical time when you should be also thinking about getting a review done, reaching out, asking the question. And here's a good example of, smart couple thinking about upsizing during this, so they might be in a really safe financial position. They're going to upgrade into their new family home. But here's the one mistake that they had before they asked the question. They had bank loyalty. They wanted to stay with their existing bank because well, maybe they like the internet banking experience because none of us really like change. Maybe, they have all their direct debits attached to that bank account. So there was this friction, right, which creates the inertia that you're talking about there, Bryce. There's this friction in the transaction, but over a conversation and a $12,000 incentive to say, well, actually, those direct debits, that would probably take me about 30 minutes to move those direct debits to my new lender. I've got a broker who's doing all the heavy lifting. I've got to provide some documents and some financials. So maybe let's round it off to maybe 2.5 hours of work. So I've got 2.5 hours of work to make 12 grand. What other job do I do that's sort of pretty good? Yeah, well, hourly rate's looking very comfortable at that sort of point of view. But it's another perfect example of, the banks are just the vehicle, guys. I mean, they are the intermediaries. They are the vehicle that's going to help you get to your outcomes you're looking for. Just again, think about the analogy we used before. The drill bit, when you go to the hardware store, you got the drill bit. You don't want the drill bit. You want the hole in the wall so you can hang your picture or, do whatever you need to do. So don't feel like you're wedded to a particular bank, because if you do, the banks love you for that, because they'll make a good profit out of you. We also talk to you about old customers versus new customers. New customers are getting recognized with better lending than you are as an old customer. But you've helped contribute to their $1 billion of profits. So how's that fair? So if you just think about them as a vehicle to your tomorrow. Now, make no mistakes, they do a great job at not going broke. So your money's protected, your money's safe. They do a great job at balancing your books in terms of, they all do a pretty consistent job irrespective of who they are. And that is our message. So don't be wedded, don't be loyal, because loyalty in the financial services area can cost you money. And Luke's example here is showing a case where obviously the bank that they were currently with wasn't big on doing bridging loans, didn't have a competitive and attractive product in the bridging loan space. So let's make a move. And here's a $4,000 sweetener on top of the $8,600 that you're also going to grab.
Hey, Ben, is it worth, as you dusting off your old mortgage broking hat here, just to let people know exactly what the mechanics of a bridging loan actually is for?
Oh, okay. So what you're trying to do here, and we always say from a property point of view, ideally the best method is to not buy the first property until you've actually sold your existing property. But the world doesn't work that way, right? And most people, well, the story goes like this, Bryce. I wasn't looking, but I've been on realestate.com or domain.com for the last 3 months, but I wasn't really looking. But all of a sudden, we've found a really nice property that we're looking to buy, but effectively we don't have the position to do that. So what a bridging loan does is it allows you to secure that new property with finance, i.e. the deposit, and also holding what we call peak debt. So it allows you to hold the peak debt with a view that they service the loan on the end debt. So it means that you've then got a contracted period in which you can sell the existing property, which will reduce that. But of course, when you go to a lender and you say, I've got 2 properties and I've got this massive amount of debt, it won't service traditionally. So that's where the bridging finance comes in, where it says you're contractually obliged that we will service this loan at the end debt as long as you sell that property at some point in that contracted period, which is usually 12 months. And that's what Luke was saying in that. So that's what a bridging loan does, but they're not cheap. So there are, again, coming back to investment savvy brokers, in some cases, you can potentially do it through releasing equity in the existing property, paying that deposit, negotiating a long-term settlement, and then ultimately, alleviating the needs for having a bridging loan finance solution as well. And that is quite common in terms of how a good investment savvy broker might coach their client. They should be saying, here's a couple of options. If you can get that longer settlement period, that might give us enough appropriate time. And then they might do the bridging finance as a last resort as opposed to a first resort story.
Mate, very good. Question without notice, mate.
Oh no, I did have to
your
go to the
feet.
back of the brain there and find that in the deep dark section of my brain.
You performed as I would expect always, mate. Last one here that we want to talk about today is from another Matt in our team, Matt Stiles. And it's an interesting story. There's a bit of nuance to it, so I'll try and summarize it and do it justice for this client. But basically, there was a couple that was renting a home, and they received some surprising news that the landlord had decided to put that property on the market. Now, this came as a bit of a shock to this client, this couple, because not only had they decided to rent, but it also, the actual property had an element of the business income that they require attached to that particular property. So, which was their side hustle, and it was ultimately to turn into a full-time job, right? So rental property, income attached to it. The landlord says, I'm going to put this on the market. Now, they therefore then go, well, that's a big spanner in the works. We actually need to do whatever we can to buy this property. And the reality is that they couldn't buy the property on their own. So they had to go and talk to the parents and sort of structure up a joint venture deal. But they said to the parents, will you actually buy this with us? And we will actually cover all of the costs, the stamp duty costs and the like, so that you can actually help us get into the property. And then the bigger picture goal here was, okay, that's how we transact and get in, but we want to sub mum and dad out ASAP as soon as possible, which would trigger extra stamp duty. There'd be capital gains tax for parents. So there's some complexity that we won't go into too much on the complexity here, other than the JV meant that they could get in, mum and dad would need to be involved, and it wasn't the desired scenario. So what happened is, at the time of negotiating, Matt said to them, okay, why don't you try and get as long a settlement as you possibly can, so that we can do whatever we can to see if we can have a plan B running in parallel. Plan A is what I just described. Plan B would be the ultimate dream is for them to buy it on their own. Long story short, Matt checked in with these clients regularly every month. How are you going with your savings goal? Because that was part of what they had to do. And their income goal was also another part of it for them to be able to service the loan, to be able to do it on their own. And I guess cutting to the chase, Ben, with less than 4 weeks left before settlement of this particular property, did one final assessment and lodged it and received formal approval. So the settlement A was completed on time, but here's the cool part of the story. The settlement was completed on time where they could buy it on their own, Ben. So what happened here was there was two strategies, plan A, plan B, but there was also some coaching going on from the sidelines to enable them to be able to buy on their own. So Ben, it's not just about the tactics, it's also about the strategy and the coaching and the, I guess, the accountability to actually help them get their North Star, what was really important to them.
Yeah, Bryce, what you'll find, having sat in that seat for many, many years a while ago, is you get households coming to you with different scenarios, different ideas of what they want to achieve and their lifestyle by design. And they're sort of thinking about all the different moving parts. What Matt Stiles has got here is an amazing story of a couple who, one of them started a side hustle. They were using the building that was part of that particular story. And they were surprised by this particular scenario where the property was going to be sold from under them. And so through Matt's knowledge, experience, critical thinking, his problem-solving skills, working with his lending partners to assess how they're going to assess the credit scores, the credit assessment and serviceability calculators, he was able to manufacture an outcome that most likely saved them over $30,000 initially. But coming back to your point, if you've
that's just from unwinding a joint venture that didn't have to happen.
Correct. So, and that's the starting point, right? And ultimately, to your point, if they only own 50% of the property and then they had to buy the other 50% off, as the capital gains would occur, then that stamp duty they would be having to pay at each time that they basically bought the partner, in this particular case, the parents, out of the property. So an amazing result based, again, on understanding credit policy. So being a subject matter expert in credit policy for that particular lender, knowing that over that 4 months leading up to that side hustle became a significantly positive cash flow growth business. And the lender was willing to listen to the story that was presented as an overall risk profile and the risk mitigation story that Matt would have presented as part of that they rubber stamped it with a green approve stamp and said, you got this. And so I just, this is, again, investment savvy brokers do purposeful and meaningful work. They make impact on your life in a positive way because they make your money work harder for you. Now, whether that's interest saved in some of the examples that we've just saw there, or in this particular final story, the crescendo story here, where it's part of a staged planning process. Bryce and I talk about often it's a chessboard with multiple moves on the chessboard. When you're accumulating property, it is not all about the interest saved. It is not all about the interest rate. They are a secondary piece to the overall end destination that you're getting to. Yes, we are double clicking and focusing in on interest rate and cost savings for those households who are pausing their accumulation phase for this point and building up their next war chest for when times do turn, and they're going to be in a position to fulfill their acquisition plans about building financial design for life and ultimately financial peace. And so, yeah, this sort of stuff warms my heart so much, Bryce, in terms of the meaningful work that our team gets to do, and tapping the shoulder of every one of those investment savvy brokers out there who don't look at the transaction, who tell you, oh, this is not a deal, or don't think about what's in it for them personally. They ultimately go about building relationships. They go about building trust. They go about strategizing with both, the sort of mid, short, medium, and long-term strategies. And then you see the execution of the tactics in terms of how they bring all that together. And so, of course, I can't be any prouder of these examples, but there are literally, as you see there, Bryce, if we're going to save over $3 million in interest save, and let's say the average is $4,000 to $6,000 of savings that we're making, that's hundreds of clients, hundreds of clients that we're looking after from the thousands of clients that we've got, because good investment savvy brokers should also be performing annual reviews anyway. So a lot of this comes from new customers coming to us, starting a conversation. As you said before, they just come in and say, I hear you guys do good work. I see you're a multi-award winning business. Can you assess my situation? Just start a conversation.
Folks, hopefully that's landing the plane on what an investment savvy mortgage broker actually is, right? So we've used this term all the way through the journey of this podcast since we're doing it. And what it meant is an investment savvy mortgage broker is someone who plays a game of strategy, and a non-investment savvy mortgage broker, or let's just call them a mortgage broker, they're just playing the borrowing capacity game and quite often just competing on price, right? So that's the important part. Now, Ben said before, it's not just about pricing and getting interest rate right, but if you actually play the strategy first, then we go super hard as we possibly can to get that interest rate bill down as much as we can, because that's where the compounding benefit comes for you. So, folks, hopefully there's a bit of summary there for you. Every dollar has got a job to do in your household, irrespective of how much debt you've got, whether you're under pressure right now, whether you're one of the lucky ones who's not under pressure right now. Every dollar has a job to do, and there's potentially an opportunity for you to do that. So ask the question and start the conversation. Remember that the banks are actually relying on you being in a state of inertia, not wanting to change. They're actually relying on you wanting to actually be in love with the internet banking system that you've got and not wanting to change those direct debits. That's the important part. So you are paying a loyalty tax if that's for you. Ben highlighted really well at the beginning what the mortgage prison is and why the banks are actually suspiciously quiet on that, because they're actually benefiting from it. And Ben talked to the fact that if you just recently saw the Commonwealth Bank's interim results, they're pretty impressive. They're well and truly in the Bs, the billions. So, and I guess the final thing that we want to really summarize around that is to make sure that you just see banks as cogs. If you are investing, even if it's just you're listening to this and you're a homeowner and you're not investing, that's fine. but they're just bricks and mortar bank accounts if you are investing. So therefore, we want you to fall in love with the actual finance behind, not the actual person who's providing you with the finance. So a couple of things, some resources for you to go and revisit. Episode 406, Beat the Banks. Go to our More Platform YouTube channel. There's a couple of series that Ben has put together on Beat the Banks and fixed rate expiry. Just a reminder, if you just tap the description wherever you're listening, we'll have the links to that now so that you can check it out. But Ben, we're on a mission. We smashed our 1.5 million interest bill saved last financial year. We are on track for 3 million this year. And if anyone's listening to this and they've got an investment savvy mortgage broker, go back to them now and talk to them. If anyone's listening to this and they don't have an investment savvy mortgage broker, help us smash that $3 million interest bill saved. We would love to be in a position to help you do that, because if there are some savings we can put in your pocket, that is going to benefit you greatly.
Yeah, and if you're dealing directly with the bank, so you got to remember about 70% of people use mortgage brokers now. There's a reason for that. They've got choice. They offer expertise, professionalism, and they save you money. So if you're directly with a bank, start the conversation with a broker and ask them to compare what you've got with the bank. Now, if you then go back to the bank and negotiate, because the first offer the banks would normally give you is not necessarily going to be their best offer. They're not best and final like what we do when we're dealing with property and real estate agents in terms of putting the best offer forward. So coming back to those educational classes that I built in the video series that you can get in the show notes and the links.
Show description.
The show description. I really unpack that with evidence-based information. So I go really deep also from a visual point of view, which we can't do on a pod. So you can see the examples that I'm using about pricing and how it all works, and net interest margin and how they find their money and how they profit from you. All of that is unpacked in a greater detail in that particular thing. So if you haven't had your mortgage reviewed in the last 12 months, if you've got an interest-only period coming out of its term, or if you have a fixed rate loan coming out of its term, and you want to get educated before you may choose to do this yourself and negotiate with your bank yourself, watch those videos. If you then also want to get a supercharged opportunity with, having some professional person who's basically running, front and center for you, then obviously focus on using an investment savvy mortgage broker as part of your team, because I would be very confident that if they are a true investment savvy broker who are awesome at critical thinking, who are awesome at problem solving and solution provision, they will be your best partner to be able to get you the best result.
And we don't often put this in the show description, but we will put a link to our team so it's easier to leave your details if you want us to have a chat with you as well. So we'll put that in the notes. All right, Ben, my life hack today is a practical one. All right. So I was at the beach when I was traveling back from West Australia earlier in summer, and had this bee, and I happened to flick it off my hand, right? And it went into the water. And then Samuel, my youngest, he thinks, oh, this is great. So he just lifted a whole heap of water underneath the bee, and he was going to, his intention was to move. But unfortunately, the bee knew it was under attack, right? So you don't have to be a rocket scientist to see what happened next, right? He got stung, and it's like, oh, and he's like, I was just trying to help him out. And I'm thinking, mate. So fast forward to the weekend, there was a bee inside. It was on the window, and I'd seen this little hack, Ben, right? So, and I'm going to try and describe it as best I can, because I know it needs vision, right? But just a bit, the old matches box, right? So the old Redheads matches box. Okay, so get one of those boxes and tip all the matches out. So it's an empty box.
Yep.
And then open the box so it's still, the two pieces are intact, but you got a bit of space. Then what you do is you walk up to the window where the bee is, and you trap the bee into the box, and you close the box, right? And here's the good news. You just go outside, and then you flip it around, and then you just open up the box. And what happens? The bee flies off, away it goes and does its business. And the important thing is no one gets stung, because Samuel was a little bit nervous based on his previous experience with the bee. So, mate, that's my little life hack.
I've had the bee sting from getting the bee out of the pool. I've actually had that little, I'll be right, I'll have enough water under my hand to scoop him out quickly. And he got me.
Yeah, so
He didn't live, obviously, to tell the tale, but I certainly.
No, that's the shame, right? Because they don't last long after that. So that's the technique that allows the bee to
Very
go off
good.
and do its wonderful work. Then, so that's my life hack today. A little bit of lighter side, but super practical if you've ever been in that situation. Ben, what's making property news?
I think the big story at the moment, there's lots of good stories going on out there, Bryce. I mean, obviously there was a couple of unbelievable results on the weekend. So that shows you that good quality property is still selling well. So keep that in mind. There is definitely momentum building up against APRA as well. So we need to keep that pressure on them in terms of, Bank of England, by way of example, moved their buffer rate back in August of last year. So we are well behind the 8 ball in terms of actually doing the right thing by consumers. But this building story around the shortage of accommodation, Bryce. So I'm picking on or double clicking on the story around the rental crisis will set to continue because developers don't really have a strong appetite for building new rental stock for a lot of good reasons, right? There's, and so Neela Sweeney unpacks those reasons in her article in terms of what's happening there.
Yeah, so interestingly, in that article, she talks about there was a poll of 70 developers at the end of last year and found that only 11% building housing stock aimed at investors for their last project, and that figure fell 8% on their next one. And it goes on, Ben, to talk about, it's hard to get overseas investors, all the issues with the finance and all that sort of stuff. But what it actually means is a shortage of stock is on the horizon. That's aimed at property investors, because these developers are going, well, I'm just going to pitch it to the owner-occupier market, which is fine, and there's a segment, and that's wonderful. But if we are in a rental crisis across the market, and then all of a sudden, if you take a little look around the corner, you'll see that that's not improving. It kind of the reason I think that, and that's the reason I thought we should chat about this article, is because we talked a couple of weeks ago about our thesis around what we think the property market outlook for 2023 is going to look like.
Yeah.
This plays into it, Ben. This plays into it. If people are paying higher rents and the yields improve, and that all of a sudden catches the attention of investors, and then they've got nothing to buy, and then they're going to buy, if they follow what we do, when they go and buy stock that's typically aimed at owner occupiers, but we want to buy it because we're investors for that reason. It hopefully, logically, you'd think would play out to the thesis that we proposed a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we did some analysis going back to obviously one of the federal elections a few years ago, and it was around a 55-45 split of investors buying new versus buying existing. So 55 was around existing property, 45 was new. If you take a significant amount of that investment stock out, you are going to have a chronic shortfall. You're going to have a chronic undersupply of property in this country, and we're trying to attract the best and brightest offshore at the moment, from offshore to arrive and immigrate to this great country. So there does need to be something that puts it in place. And I know this is going to sound like, oh yeah, here we go. The barber wants to, bring another haircut in them. The governments are going to have to provide some type of incentive here. If they don't, we are going to have chronic shortfall of stock. So, yep, I'm really glad that developers are looking at the styling and design and maybe a bit of extra floor space, internal living space for some of these apartments for owner occupiers. That's a big tick. I think that trend was starting already, but I still think it needs, because people do want to live closer to the action. They do want to have, a good group of people want to have that social interaction and so forth. So there is a market for that. But we do need 20%, 30% of investors buying these off the plans and house and land package products. We don't necessarily think that they'll be worth buying. But there could be a little window in the next couple of years where house and land packages, just purely based on the shortage of stock, could actually do okay in terms of the shorter term in some particular areas. Certainly from our point of view, when we're seeing, semi-detached and sort of townhouse developments in established areas, which are a bit of that infill stuff, that we certainly run the ruler over those when there's a small number of them to see whether. So that's why we're sort of saying we never say that we never buy brand new, but it's very rare. They would have to be part of a small block or a small development, very small development. So that just gives you some idea.
Well, yeah, location will do the heavy lifting on
Yeah.
that decision for sure. So, but folks, yeah, it's worth considering. If you've got we documented that listings are already thin to start this year, and good work by Neela. She was involved in the Your Investment Property magazine in a previous professional role. Now she's doing great stuff at the Financial Review. So, obviously, want to credit where credit's due for that conversation, but it's worth thinking about. So, mate, big show today. We hopefully the intention when you and I started planning for this was, how do we make a contribution to people that are feeling some pressures in their household around money? Well, the answer is we want everyone to have the view that every dollar's got a job to do, and you should start a conversation. You should ask the question, and hopefully that's given people some fuel and some fueled the thoughts and ideas around what is possible. And obviously we only did a very small cross-section of some of the things that we're being exposed to on a daily basis. So hopefully that's helped, Ben.
Look, Bryce, if I can finish by just saying that's right. I mean, there's money to be made here, don't leave money on the table. Like, you can sit back and say cost of living is going up. Yep, all of these things are real. But here is an opportunity through a phone call and starting a conversation that you might actually find some of that money coming back into your household. And that's the contribution that, today's episode hopefully will make for some.
Very good. Thanks for bringing your best today, mate, on behalf of the community. Until next week.
Knowledge is empowering, Bryce, but only if you act on it.
There you go, folks. We'll see you next week.
Hey guys, Bryce here again. Just want to catch you before you go and let you know, if you're new to our community, there are a lot of episodes to catch up on, but it's really important that you start from the very beginning at episode number 1, because episode 1 through to 20 share all of the foundational pillars and frameworks that you need to know to get the best out of listening to this podcast. So I'd recommend that you start there, and the little tip is to maybe start on 1.5 speed. Now, for those of you that are time poor and don't have time to go back from the beginning, don't worry, we've got you covered as well, because we've created a binge guide that goes through all of the details and makes it easy for you to read and get up to speed very, very quickly. So if you go to thepropertycouch.com.au/fast track, you will be able to download that binge guide and you will be up to speed in no time. And whilst you're there, I've got a few extra goodies for you, because we have our top 5 frameworks that you'll learn on this podcast, as well as the Make Money Simple Again ebook, which will help you with the foundations of basic money management, so you'll have everything you need to succeed in building your own lifestyle design and getting the best out of this podcast. Now, just a reminder that anything that we cover on this podcast is not considered financial advice. We certainly recommend that you get your unique circumstances looked at by your individual advisor, and everything we talk about is just general in nature. But folks, I want to encourage you again to go to thepropertycouch.com.au/fast track, and you can go and get all those goodies and catch up